I've mentioned him in my streams a couple of times, but never in the videos. So I was watching one of the latest Saladino videos, and he mentions in it that Neil Druckmann got a tattoo of a hammer. It's the hammer that Abby has in The Last of Us. And he brandishes it as if it's supposed to be ironic, but you and I both know that it is not. I hardly remember that Abby had a hammer. If something is iconic in The Last of Us, it's probably her golf club, and if he really wanted to dig into that heel persona, he would tattoo himself with the golf club, but he won't because he knows that he has brought shame and dishonor on the Naughty Dog name with all the terrible things he has done in the past couple of years. And I'm not just talking about The Last of Us Part 2. If you go back and you look at things like Uncharted, you will see that he has his print all over it. Most of the game is okay, but the last couple of chapters, Drake spends it apologizing to his wife and talking about how awesome she is and how great she is and how he doesn't deserve her. Drake also ends up having a daughter instead of a boy, and originally he was supposed to have a boy. And it's just something I noticed, but you'll see that in Western media, after a time skip, protagonists usually had a couple of kids, but as time went on, they only had one, and the one was a boy. And now they only have one kid, and that kid is always a daughter. And I find it funny, especially now that a lot of the Western population is convinced that having a kid is too costly and that having kids is bad for the environment. I find it really fun that it's almost like it's some kind of programming that is predictive. But anyways, you know that hammer is not iconic. Neil Druckmann can try to be a heel as much as he wants, but he's just a lolcow. His surname is Neil Cuckman. We know he isn't cool and nobody likes him. And then it made me wonder, how long did Naughty Dog really suffer under him? My co-host posted a comment under the video, and it got me wondering, no, really, for how long has Naughty Dog really been bad? And I went to Wikipedia and just looked up a list of all of their games in the past few years. Naughty Dog was started by Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin, and after a while they just left. They had issues with the publishers and they decided to leave, and that is the beginning of the end. That's the mark where you know that, okay, things will never be the same again. If I remember well, don't quote me on this, they were partially on Jack X, but I know that after Jack X, after the PlayStation 2 era, they kinda left. And that's kind of the issue with computer sciences and video games. If you're working in that industry now, I feel bad for you because I know that there's a lot of layoffs right now because a lot of people are just being replaced by AI and they're just, they're cutting costs. And a lot of people got the shaft. And the thing is that now with AI, it is one of the worst time to be in computer sciences because now it has evolved enough that we can completely automate the system. Being in computer sciences now is the equivalent of being a cashier. Why would you have someone manually do and repeat a redundant task like that when you can simply automate it? In an ideal world, but not a perfect world, people would find another job that really does need the human consciousness to be well executed, or would find something to put their time in, some kind of art or some kind of sport or form of combat. But this is not the world we live in. We live in clown world. If you wanted to make your money in everything that's computer related, you had to be born in the 60s or the 70s, 80s in the latest, because all those guys that we know and admired and looked up to, most of these guys were done with high school by the time the late to mid 80s rolled out, early 90s at the worst, and most of them then went on to college and were in the industry by the time the mid 90s rolled out. Afterwards, you'll start seeing that a lot of veterans of the industry start to leave around the PS2 to PS3 era. By the time you thought, wow, I'm gonna be a game programmer, well, it's too late, because most of these jobs, well, first off, a lot of people wanted to get into these jobs, so you had a lot of competition, but the writing was on the wall, but we didn't see it. By the time the 6th generation rolled out, most of these people were in either executive position where they weren't doing really that much and couldn't influence the outcome of the game, or just left the company or made their own company. In Japan, there was something similar where, for example, Koji Igarashi and Keiji Inafune left their respective companies to start their own IP, but in the case of Ifune, it didn't work out for him, as well as Igarashi. And even now, people like Hideki Kamiya are leaving too. So you can see that even in Japan, where that business is booming, and especially if you look at something like Nintendo, people are doing well, and they're not really, there's not all the turmoil that exists in the Western world. A lot of people are starting to leave, and really, people like Hideki Kamiya were part of the old guard. You know, it was really one of the last. That guy has been working since the late 90s. Was the director of Resident Evil 2, and his heydays were in the early 2000s. I don't want to say that he peaked. I think he's still a really good director, but really a lot of his bangers were in that 2000 to 2010 period with Bayonetta 1, Beautiful Joe, Devil May Cry 1. That's where he really hit it out of the park. And now, well, even he is leaving, and all your heroes left around. By the time you got into video game programming or art in 2010, 2015, most of these people had left. So if we look at the timeline, even if we're generous, we can see that since 2007, Naughty Dog, like most video games and video game companies, have fallen into this cinematic, pretentious joyride roller coaster. And 2007 is a long time, and like I said, it's if we're being generous. Honestly, we can say 2005 after Jack X was made. So we have Uncharted 1, 2, 3 that came out with a 2-year period, because that was the time when video games were getting bigger, but we still had a number of people that were reasonable, and we didn't go the route of, well, because we have a bigger budget, we need to have a bigger game. No, you could split the budget on 2 games, and you could still have a team of 50 or 100 people and work on the game for 2 or 3 years. So they came about a 2-year gap each, and then you have a 2-year gap after Uncharted 3. Uncharted 3 was made by the B team, so there's a 2-year gap between 2 and 3, and then another 2-year gap between 3 and The Last of Us. The A team was working on The Last of Us, and then after that, it's the beginning of the end. So you have The Last of Us Part 1, you have a DLC, Left Behind, then you have a remaster that came out in 2014, and already then people were starting to question the idea of remasters, because a year later doesn't make too much sense. You could say that, well, it's because now the PS4 is out and we need a title for it. Okay, fair enough, I'll leave it to you. But then afterwards, you have Uncharted 4, and Uncharted 4, if you really look at it, it's the last original game that really came out of that team. Afterwards, you have a spin-off, The Lost Legacy. You have The Last of Us Part 2, but that game is a fucking flop. Then you have Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection, so a collection, a remaster. Then you have The Last of Us 1 remaster and The Last of Us 2 remaster. This company, because of Neil Druckmann, has fallen into a sinkhole of just The Last of Us. They either don't release anything else because he's really obsessed with making this fucking horrible idea work, or because they don't have the budget to release anything else. Because between The Last of Us 1 and The Last of Us 2, there is a 7-year gap. I remember when I was naive and being excited for The Last of Us Part 2, and then I saw the writing on the wall again. I have this friend. He's a really nice guy, and he's cool to hang around with. But the thing is that he doesn't like controversy. He doesn't want to see things as they are, but he doesn't understand that if you close your eyes, the punch is still coming. In striking, actually, the worst punches are the punches that you don't see coming. Because if you see a punch coming, even if it's hard, you can roll with it, you can block, you can try to contract your muscles so your neck doesn't whiplash. You can save yourself. You can do things to save yourself from a bad punch. But you can't do anything if you close your eyes. If you close your eyes, if Mike Tyson closed his eyes and you punched him, you would knock him out. But the thing is that if you didn't knock him out, then he would just maul you to fucking death. And that friend, really nice guy, but he doesn't want to see the truth. And I remember when The Last of Us 2 was about to be released, I remember being doubtful about the ultimate quality of that game. It was when Anita Sarkeesian was somewhat still the rage, and Neil Druckmann invited her and thanked her for all the input she gave. And that's where I really got suspicious. Even as a ceremonial thank you, why would you bring in Anita Sarkeesian? There's no way, you can tell that she had a lot of input. But I don't think that her input was necessary. I think Neil Druckmann was going to tank that boat by himself, whether or not he had Sarkeesian. And then I looked up the actors, and one of the actors that plays the trans character is, of course, terminally online and is on Twitter and spends most of his time telling people how, I'm not gonna use that term, cisgendered, how normal people are terrible and deserve to die. And you see that and you think, well, there's no way that game is going to come out good, because he's surrounded himself with awful people. And because he has surrounded himself with awful people, I'm starting to think that he must be an awful person. And when there was that leak of The Last of Us with Joel, turned out it was true. What's so bad about your character dying? It's not the fact that he died. It's the fact that he died in a really pathetic and stupid way, like a lot of characters are right now, a lot of legacy characters, and mostly male legacy characters. And afterwards, it was basically the Abby show. It was Abby the game, and nobody cared about Abby. So for the past 17 years now, since 2007, this company has been down in the hole. Even The Last of Us 1 was not going to be good. The only reason it was good was because Amy Hennig was there and said to Neil that all of his ideas were stupid. The premise of Last of Us 2 was the premise of Last of Us 1, traversing the country to get revenge. But that doesn't make sense. It's hard to cross the country in a post-apocalyptic world. And basically, he fired Amy Hennig, and all the things he was told not to do, he did. And The Last of Us 1, I think the real lesson we can pull from this is that The Last of Us 1 was good despite the presence of Neil Druckmann. And The Last of Us 2 was bad because of Neil Druckmann. Neil Druckmann is the Kathleen Kennedy of the video game industry. When I grow up, I want to be like Neil Druckmann. I want to be disrespected by my wife. When I grow up, I want to be like Neil Druckmann. Get off by being ignored by my wife. When I'm cooked, I'm hard, making shit games, that's why I rock. I want to be ignored by my wife. When I grow up, I want to be like Neil Cook, man. I want to be disrespected by my wife. When I grow up, I want to be like Neil Cook, man. Get off by being ignored by my wife. When I'm cooked, I'm hard, making shit games, that's why I rock. I want to be ignored by my wife. I succumb to the darkness because there's nothing out there and I don't have the courage to create because I can't fight back.